Hey there, everybody. Today we're joined by Pat Utz, co-founder at Abstract, a promising seed stage startup building the future of AI for regulatory impact. Pat is on the Forbes 30 under 30 list and is an electrical engineering graduate from Loyola Marymount University. Patrick, welcome.
Hey, happy to be on board here, Jose.
Yeah. Let's get right into it. So, Abstract seems like it's making a splash, $4.9 million in seed stage fundraising. Congratulations on that. How'd you get to this point?
Thank you. Thank you. And I would say that, it's not advertising the announcement, but, it's hard to believe we've raised over $9 million for the company at this point. We've been at it for about five, 5 years, 6 years, depending on when we consider the research era versus truly venture backed era of abstract. But yeah, it's much harder than people make it seem. Main lessons are we could probably dive into later, but main lessons are for sure just never giving up.
I bet. I bet. I mean, the compliance space is known to be rough, a bit complicated. So, how'd you get into doing this with Abstract? I mean, what was like the aha moment that led you in this direction?
Yeah, so we started this as a research project out of a small school named LMU, so Loyola Marymount University, based in Los Angeles. I was studying electrical engineering and computer science with my co-founder Mo at the time, who was also studying the same thing. And then our third co-founder Matt, actually known him since childhood. So I joke that at this point I'm surprised we're not enemies because we've known each other for so long. Somehow we are now, after through 12 and college, we're now building a company, building the same company for 5 years. The sort of origin behind this was our general frustration with the lack of transparency around what's going on in government. And in 2019, we were studying natural language processing and these
Mhm.
early models, pre large language models that we saw could actually abstract magazines and newspapers. So the idea was to essentially use natural language processing to abstract and summarize laws. And somehow we would, you know, solve all of society's problems. That's what, typical college students want to do. But pretty much after that, realized that it was really tough getting a job out of college. I always say this pretty openly. There was somebody at one of the big FANG companies who's their head recruiter, and she was also an alum of Loyola Marymount. And she said, we're hiring people that we're looking at schools that are a little bit larger or maybe have a little bit more of a prestigious, name because we only have so many dollars we can spend in recruiting from these undergraduate programs. So maybe go work somewhere else and then come reapply for this, sexy FANG company. And after hearing that, we're like, okay, if you're not going to hire us, then we're just going to start this company and we're going to hire your engineers. And so that's what we did. We ended up,
Nice.
you know, starting off with lobbyists and associations as like an initial sort of customer set. And then we expanded to doing what we do now for large corporations and big law firms. But it was one hell of a journey and happy to dive into parts of it here. So.
Yeah, let's dive in. When you're starting a business, you have to kind of have to validate the problem before you build. So, how did you go about doing that with Abstract?
Yeah. So again, like I said, it started as a research project, but when we were going to get more serious about actually starting a business, the first set was just, hey, let's pick a set of customers that we think could find use for this product that we've built. That's sort of against typical knowledge, which is talk to customer first and then build product. We had already built some version of the product.
Mm.
And so what I ended up doing is I ended up cold calling over 200 chambers of commerce, trade associations, lobbyists. These were all people that I knew. Excuse me. These were all people that I knew in the space. And essentially, what happened is after talking to them, we started seeing patterns about what their pain points were with respect to understanding government regulations and laws. And so I went to, go try to raise some venture capital out of college and sort of got the typical response of, "Hey, you're a punk out of college. Why are we going to give you money?"
Right.
And so the only thing we could do is actually build traction. So did the cold calling. 3 to 4 months later, we bootstrapped and built our own version of the initial abstract platform, which was like a project management tool. And that project management tool, we had about 30 lobbying firms, law firms, and associations using it. And so with that sort of initial product traction, I went to go pitch to those 60 investors again. And then finally, two of them cut us a check. And that was when we started the venture backed route. So yeah, that traction beats everything. But in
Right.
order to know what people want, you got to talk to them.
100%. How are you talking to them right now? What's your current method of keeping in touch?
Yeah. So, I mean, law has changed, right? So, um, now that we're a more established company, and we have actual product lines and customer success teams and sales teams, etc.
Right.
When I do discovery, it's very much a, hey, I saw you're in this space. This is what we do. These are the people who've backed us, or these are the people that I know that because now we have a pretty robust network in the space. And yeah, we just have a conversation, right? I do have to distinguish between having a conversation to just, test out a new theory about a feature we're going to build versus, hey, we're trying to get this person as a customer. But it never stops, right? Like as a founder, especially, right? Usually it's the CEO or CRO, depending on how the founders split the roles. Um, you're always selling your product to customers. You're always selling your company and the vision to investors, and you're also selling the vision to your team, your employees. So you're just constantly selling. That's
Yep.
just that's what you signed up for.
In a way. So if we were to look at abstract and what it is and the timeliness of abstract, considering the moment in AI, why do this now? Why are people also believing in it now more than ever?
Yeah, totally. So we saw this happen, or at least the problem that like started this was our frustration with the lack of transparency back in 2019 around what's going on with laws, right? And government codes. Um, Forgot to mention also, all three of us co-founders have parents have worked in public policy abroad. So my family
Wow.
worked in policy in Argentina. Most families from Kuwait had people worked at the ministry there, and Matt's family worked at the Department of Commerce in Taiwan. Our parents don't know what we do. They still don't understand it. I mean, they do, but I joke that like they just will never understand like what a venture backed company is. But they were responsible for instilling a sense of, trying to understand what government is doing. I grew up listening to my dad talk about tariffs or talk about issues around taxation, right, for various applications. So there was that aspect. But again, the genesis was frustration with lack of understanding what the hell our politicians or elected officials are doing about laws, right? And that was, again, it doesn't matter where you stand politically, but it was during Trump's first administration that became, at least for us, really evident at the federal level as it started trickling down to the other levels of government. And so, what we do now is aligned with that initial vision and project that we had back in 2019. It's essentially proactively identifying, analyzing, and predicting where shifts in regulations, policy, news is going to head and how that's going to be a risk, right? Or an opportunity to a company. And that's why we typically don't say that we're in compliance. We're not compliance because compliance is a reactive motion. So if you were to say like sort of what industry we're in, I would say we straddle like legal tech, government tech, and applied AI. Maybe add a little bit of like data slash intelligence in there. But essentially, what we're doing is we're taking in all the changes across governments, any other things that they're outputting on the news, and then with context, distilling how that's going to be a risk or an opportunity to a company.
I can imagine that the product is something like a dashboard that's attuned to the client. Now, what sort of insights are you guys providing to clients that really change the way that they operate?
Yeah. So to your first point, it is a platform, right, that we've built that allows multiple business units and teams to work together on these issues. Typically when we talk to a big enterprise, we're working with their legal team or they have a policy government affairs team. But almost always, like, why does it matter? Well, it usually matters because a regulatory change or a policy change is going to impact three things: product, labor, and taxes slash finances. So those three things: product, labor, and taxes are what companies typically fear is going to be at risk, right? Or maybe they have an opportunity to optimize for something, right? So yeah, typically the workflow is proactively identify a change. This is going to impact, a product feature or maybe some contracting agreement we have with an employee.
Right.
And then from there, suggesting next courses of action. One of those may be compliance. The other may be proactively try to advocate for change or do nothing. Oftentimes, companies decide to do nothing. So hopefully that answers your question there in terms of like the different flows.
It does, and it's really interesting that you split those up into three different categories. I'm wondering when Abstract is parsing through most recent announcements or most recent advancements in regulations or recent events, whatever it is, how do you guys decide what's relevant within those categories? Is it certain database technology? Or are you vectorizing internal knowledge? Like, what's the idea of how to decide?
Yeah, that's part of like how we build the context library for each company, and that's sort of like a more bespoke approach that we take. Depending on the company, we figure out what context is needed for the large language models to run on. And so context is really important. That again can either be just purely publicly available information about the company, or we dive deep into their internal documents. And that's very similar to other enterprise, AI solutions out there and their approach.
Mhm.
The really interesting slash very hard thing about this is there's a lot of government bodies and they all have different websites, and it's just for lack of a better word, it's a shit show. So there's over 140,000 government entities in the US. We're talking special districts, cities, counties, states, state agencies, federal agencies. So 140,000, you know, millions of changes a year. And every website's different, right?
Mhm.
The city of San Francisco is going to have a very different format than the city of New York, right? And some cities, they don't post in very friendly sort of file formats for
Right.
our scrapers. And so even with large language models that can sort of process vaster amounts of information, one, it's really expensive to scrape and structure with LLMs at this point. But two, even if you had an LLM take care of it, you still have to structure the data. And knowing how all the data is structured, that's sort of the expertise we have to develop in house.
That actually leads really well into my next question of what sort of persona finds the most immediate value, like lawyers, policy teams, or like biz ops, like, and how do you end up customizing that onboarding for those different personas? Because I can imagine they have very strong opinions about different, let's say those three categories.
Yeah. So when we look at personas, at least at this stage, we're deprioritizing the persona and prioritizing the workflow. So within
Mhm.
a company, we're just seeing who within your company is actually trying to read through and analyze all this noise and junk from these government entities.
Right.
And so sometimes it's legal, sometimes it's like some person in the product team, right? But at the end of the day, like that workflow is the same. Then we just have to fine tune what is the context. Is it with respect to your product or your labor contracts, etc.? So I think
Right.
really focusing on like who has that workflow that we're disrupting, that's the key, and that applies to a lot of these applied AI companies. It's a little bit different than the go to market approach that used to be the norm for SaaS companies. Yeah, because I think more so than before, um, like a lot of the SaaS companies after the dot com boom, it was all about productivity, sort of like taking something that was maybe done on pen and paper and then putting it on the cloud. And then you can like save some time, but you still had uh like a workflow that you had to learn with that product. Now with a lot of these large language models, it's that on steroids. It's literally looking at workflows on workflows and automating that entire thing where the actual role of that person is rendered not needed anymore. And by the way, we're very careful with how we talk about this because the truth is like we're not looking to replace any headcount right now. I think we're still a whiles away before that happens. It's more so force multiplying your team, right? How can we add horsepower to your team to identify more things are relevant before they become an issue?
Right. That again leads really well into my next question about workflow. So, what tends to be the workflow that wins the deal for you for these like new clients? Yeah.
Yeah, usually the workflow that wins us the deal is if they have a workflow of identifying what regulatory or legislative changes are happening that are relevant for the company, or if they're a law firm, for their clients. And that workflow, right, if we break it down, is one, monitoring all the noise. And that involves usually having tools like social media monitoring tools, news, subscriptions.
Right.
Maybe they're getting updates from their consultants. There's also like build tracking tools out there. And then so that's monitoring. And then identification is actually reading. So reading through all these documents, right? So that workflow, if they have a person or a team of people doing that, they're a prime use case for Abstract.
Right, because I can imagine having to stay up to date and read through all of these documents, all these releases is incredibly time consuming for a person, and you really need to distill down, right?
Exactly. And depending on the company, there's varying levels of how much information they're trying to distill.
Right. I'm wondering, how does Abstract meet the moment, considering how's this current administration is approaching policy change?
Yeah. So I would say that right now, this is the most amount of change that we've seen in, I would say, decades
Yeah.
from any federal administration. And that trickles down. It trickles down to the states because then the states feel the need to regulate and draft policy at the same amount, if not higher, sort of pace. The way we address that again is sort of why we built this, right? Every day we essentially do two scrapes. And so with respect to all the noise that's coming out now, especially with the current federal administration, we're staying up to date with the latest that's going to be relevant. Because usually you can't, you know, output more than one critical sort of change per day. Or if you have multiple changes, whether it's a bill or a proposed regulation, it's all going to come out in a day and it's not going to change again until the next day. So that's why we do it twice a day.
Got it. That's a really smart way of saving on computation as well. So, with these tariffs that were just launched, that changes things across the board. You guys seem to focus on law firms, not exclusively, but like primarily. I guess that's also where you started, considering the
Well,
project.
yeah. So we used to sell to lobbying firms. We don't really sell to that market as much anymore. Right now, we are primarily focused on two sort of key customers, which is large law firms and that represent corporate clients and large corporations that typically have some defined in-house legal team.
Right. So, what would be the angle of attack considering the tariffs that were just launched for Abstract?
A lot of that is information that is being outputted through the executive branch, which is a form of government entity. So the way we ingest all of this is, or the way we would set it up for customers, we would say, hey, are you interested in what the executive branch is doing? Oftentimes they say, yes, I'm very interested in figuring out how this is going to impact my company. So that is one of the options that customers are able to pick. And then we are able to distill what's relevant.
Okay. Now, in terms of the firms, considering what you guys do, you guys are targeting specific, firms or people or firms of firms, like these law firms that are like foot in the door to the corporate clients that you would like to serve, right? So I'm wondering if that now changes because of the tariffs, or if anything, widens the potential like sales net for you guys.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely widening our sales net just because there are now more companies that are being not regulated, but they're feeling the implications of
Right.
the executive branch. Because again, that's not a regulatory body that's doing this, it's just the executive orders right now.
Exactly.
Um, but that's also trickling down to all these other states that are starting to create policy, right? That is
Right.
outside of the regulatory bodies. And so, yes, there are many more companies now that are starting to have their ears perk up and realize, hey, this is going to be relevant for us. And maybe we should figure out how we're going to identify what's relevant and advocate for some change or change a process internally. Because a lot of it, to be honest, most companies they're not going to actually create an advocacy or lobbying core around this. They're just going to have to change their internal strategy and
Right.
process. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's those processes that are inherently underperforming or historically because of the amount of information that's required in order to make any strategic play, just underperform without something like abstract to synthesize all that
Yeah,
information.
yeah, and I would say, like, it just, I would say in a perfect world, every company should have a very close pulse with everything that's going on, but because of the manual nature of this workflow, most of these companies do not, right? So now
Right.
that the pressure is increasing to where, if there's this sort of pressure of, "Hey, if I don't know what's going on, I might be slapped with fines that I never expected."
Exactly.
That's where there's this need to be proactive, right? About what's changing, proactive about updating your strategy and making sure you're ready for what's coming.
In light of staying up to date and being ready for whatever happens, using a platform like Abstract helps you get the most recent information in the best form possible to make something actionable. Now, there are people out there who jumped on board the AI quote unquote bandwagon in the first phase where the LLMs, ChatGPT, like 3.5, right? They had hallucinations and people somehow started to mistrust it over the first 1 to 2 years of technology. We now know that hallucinations aren't as big of an issue, but considering that there is that bad taste in some people's mouths. So, what would you say to people who are worried about the hallucinations and the legal risks um, of it with a platform like Abstract?
Yeah, I would say two things, right? One is citations, right? We're always providing, where we're pulling the results from, showing as much of the reasoning as possible. And then two, just double checking the work. This is why I'm saying we're not ready to replace humans just yet. I think there still needs to be some human working with the platform or model, like whatever it is. They need to be working with that large language model, um, and the outputs that's creating to make sure there's like a last check before they send it off. Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, if Abstract had been around 10 years ago, what famous corporate or regulatory disaster might have been prevented or seen?
Oh, that's a really good question. I would say that if Abstract was around, and fully deployed, Enron might have ended up differently.
Enron. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Did you see the eggs that they recently joke launched?
I did. I did. It's hilarious, but
It is
no, I will reserve my comments on that.
a good it's a good legal approach for sure.
Yeah.
So next one, what one bet that you're making that no one else sees yet?
Yeah. I would really lean into the context piece, right? I am very bullish that as these models get better at reasoning, if we're able to identify, and we as in, the startup venture community building these new companies, these new wave of applied AI companies, um, as we focus on specific workflows, the context is so important. And I think given the depth that you're able to train these models on, um, there's just we call it infinite intelligence, right? There's an infinite possibility of intelligence you can feed into them where there's no way you're going to train a person or even a team of people to have that much context, right, on a problem set. And
Right.
so I just see this future of like, these solutions performing tasks with so much more context and awareness than what we have, where we really should be trusting that model or that platform. And we really should not be doing that work ourselves anymore.
Right. So that ends up freeing people's time up to do maybe more human
Yeah.
going
I would
forward.
say to work on higher level sort of strategy and concepts, right? Like
Right.
the best explanation I have for now, I mean, there's much better ones out there. I'm sure going to arise, but I always say, you know, the calculator was such a, I mean, we don't think about it now, but people used to have to do all of the arithmetic by hand, right? We
Right.
had rooms filled with people called calculators, right? That NASA had, essentially doing a lot of that arithmetic by hand. And so I would say that the way in which calculators have allowed us to further what we do in mathematics and applied mathematics, that's what these models are going to do for anything that's linguistics based.
In a way, you guys are betting on the wave of AI only getting better, that the reasoning is only going to get better, that the context window is going to expand, and that in a lot of ways it will allow us to do higher level things. And you aren't betting that AI will stay at its current competency,
Yeah,
right?
I think this is just the base level. It's only going to get better from here. And with respect to AI, I'm talking specifically again large language models. There's a lot of advancements going on in what's going on with computer vision and other verticals of artificial intelligence research. But with respect to linguistics and language, the way that we sort of think about work as it pertains to, anything that's spoken or written is completely going to be disrupted. And what I see happening is just a redefinition of the work of any sort of entry level analysts at any of these jobs, right? So
Mhm.
like what we're seeing is the entry level analyst at a law firm or at a investment bank, right? You're fresh out of college. Most of the work that they're doing, that will be done at much, you know, greater efficiency with these, next wave of tools. And so the question becomes, what's the track for that analyst becoming a partner at the firm?
Mhm.
It's going to be completely different. I have no idea what it's going to look like, but it's not going to be the typical work that they are staying up until 2 a.m. Right now. So, and it's going to happen in investment banking. It's going to happen in all these sort of white collar jobs that have, an emphasis on language as its core competency.
Right. And I wonder in that sort of future where entry level job is disrupted and the overall vertical pipeline of talent also ends up becoming disrupted, what the actual value that people are bringing to the table is ultimately.
Yep. We'll have to wait and see.
We will have to wait and see. This is my last question. All right. If you were to pitch abstract in a sentence to a 90-year-old senator and a 19-year-old hacker, what would you say?
Ooh, same pitch to both.
Let's see. Try it.
Okay, so 90-year-old senator and 19-year-old hacker. I would have two versions. So the 90-year-old senator, I would say, um, Abstract is a platform that uses artificial intelligence to do the work of a team of analysts in figuring out how these government policies are going to be relevant for you, Senator, or for your team drafting policy. To the hacker, I would say, Abstract, we've built a platform that is leveraging large language models to distill millions of data points across government websites that we're structuring twice a day. And we're using these LLMs to actually distill what's relevant for all of our customers. So those would be my two pitches.
Based on the conversation, I've been hearing a lot about, okay, law and corporate clients and risk regulations being up to date. I wonder how this fits into investment theses that these different firms have. Is that something that you guys are considering or looking into?
I think leveraging it as some sort of alpha is definitely something that's relevant, but it's usually something that would be more long term, not short term, because of the pace at which policy moves. But yes, it's something that we have been exploring already with two firms. Yep.
Yeah, it's a smart thing to do, I think. I would have loved to have made this like a 2 hour conversation, honestly, but I know you're a busy guy and I really do appreciate you taking the time today to answer all of these somewhat silly, but honestly, sometimes really important questions that people are wondering because it's timely what Abstract is doing. So, uh, any last words, any last messages for the audience before we jump off?
No, I would just say just remember this concept of infinite intelligence. These models and this future that we're embarking on with large language models, like there's just infinite possibilities in terms of what we can teach them to do and fundamentally reshape how we operate as a society. So a lot of the sentiment is very pessimistic about how it's going to take jobs and it's going to hurt us. And I think, media has done a great job of doing that. And I think it's my last sort of word of saying, I think we should be optimistic, right? And there are ways that we can all work together as a society to make this, actually beneficial for every level.
I 100% agree. All right, Pat. Well, I really appreciate the time. Until the next one.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, Jose.